My friends, what were the German developers doing decades ago in Pokémon Snap back in 1999? A recently unearthed ancient text has revealed some very unusual claims in Pokémon Snap, which, if true, could imply that we've been missing something huge in a couple of high scores. The official German Pokémon Snap strategy guide lists 2 high scores for Butterfree and Snorlax, which are higher than the known records set by the very best Pokémon Snap players throughout the game's history. But the crazy thing is, the rest of these German devs' scores make sense and seem legit. So could these new purported records for Butterfree and Snorlax be legitimate as well? Let's take a closer look at the ancient texts and the alleged claims of Smetbo 4960 and Relaxo 4400. So Pokémon Snap is, of course, the classic photography game where you take pictures of Pokémon which are scored based on composition regarding their size, pose, and if any of the other same Pokémon are in the frame. Old strategy guides were pretty useful in helping Nintendo 64 gamers navigate these games well before internet use became widespread, and certainly before there was a lot of content, walkthroughs, and guides posted openly online. Browsing through these strategy guides for Pokémon Snap reveals some interesting things. Maps of the stages, useful hints as to get the best poses or specials, how to reveal hidden Pokémon, typical things of that nature. But deep within these guides, we can find a single page that leads to complete mystery, which, if we could crack, could lead to an improvement in the record scores for a couple of Pokémon. A German viewer reached out to me with this page from the official German Pokémon Snap Spielerberater, or Player's Guide, which lists the high scores for all 63 Pokémon which can be found in-game. And the most important thing to keep in mind here, is that these scores do not appear to be made up, nor do they appear to be very noobish. Rather, they're pretty decent scores. They're not far out of line with what the Pokémon Snap high score community has achieved in 25 years of playing the game. If you looked at these scores and told anyone they were a top 40 player's personal score page, it would be very believable. For example, they have listed Mew at 10,000 points, which is the max score for Mew, a perfect 1,000 size with a 2,500 special and 1,500 pose, doubled for good technique to 10,000. A perfect Mew can be a little bit of a grind, so either these scores were played by guys who actually grinded relatively hard to achieve some decent scores, or they just calculated the score of a perfect Mew based on the max possible size, pose, and special, whether any of the developers actually achieved that score or not. Pikachu's high score provides additional insight on such a possibility. The German guide shows Pikachu's high score at 8,000 points, which is the record score for Pikachu. Now this requires a very niche technique in conjunction with a rare special, Flying Pikachu or Pikachu on Articuno. For 8,000 points, you generally need to intentionally slow down the movement of the on-rails 0-1 vehicle by alternating presses of C left and C right. Then you need to let Articuno's path through the stage clip through you and snap Pikachu while sort of inside Articuno in order to get Pikachu's max 1,000 size. This, in combination with the 1,000 pose and 2,000 special, give you the 8,000 points. All that being said, it's somewhat unlikely to imagine that the developers would know to do this kind of mildly glitchy technique in order to get a max Pikachu score, but they could have easily just calculated the score by figuring out that maybe a max size 1000 Pikachu is possible. The English version of the Player's Guide provides additional insight on this. In the English version, they show screenshots of Flying Pikachu in which they only get a 250 size score for a total score of 6,500. This is more in line with what someone would have gotten back in 1999 before knowledge was spread about how to slow down the vehicle, getting a closer look at Pikachu and Articuno's back. However, on a later page where they list all of the English high scores, they also do claim that they have an 8,000 Pikachu high score. Their heading over this section reads, "Listed below, you'll find the highest scores our crack team of Pokemon experts could earn. If you want a challenge, try to match them, but be warned, these scores are extremely hard to reach, so don't be discouraged if they seem impossible. And perhaps most fascinatingly, not all of these scores are identical to the ones listed in the German Player's Guide. This definitely implies that the scores weren't set by, say, one team in Japan or the USA or Germany and then just shared across all the guides, but rather there was at least some independent research and play between each of the contributing teams. For example, Growlithe's high score listed in the German guide is 4580, while in English it's 4710. This pales in comparison to the record today of 6120, but this all goes to show that there was probably some independent research between teams, and that their scores mostly seemed legit. Seemed like things that decent players who knew the game well would get at the time of the game's release. Further evidence that they didn't just assume a score with 1000 max size, then add this to the best pose and double it, can be found when looking at Gyarados and Charizard. I've spoken at length before about Charizard and how the max theoretical score of 4500 has never been done, since the best size we can manage is 990 for a score of 4480. In both the German and English guides, they have scores listed of 4380, which would imply a 940 size. Again, something very realistic for the time when these scores were published. Gyarados shows this even better. A max size of 1000 is possible, along with the best pose of 1350, doubled to 4700. A couple dozen players have achieved this score, but it's actually really quite hard, and usually takes several hours of grinding, even knowing the correct setup to give yourself a shot at 1000 size. Most people get stuck at a 990 size Gyarados for a score of 4680. And in both of the English and German guides, we see the developers report high scores of, indeed, 4680. This to me implies that they generally did not just calculate a high theoretical score, assuming a 1000 size was possible, but actually went out and played to see what they could get. And Gyarados is the perfect example because they realized they could only get 990 and didn't even fake it to claim, yeah, we can get 10 points higher to 4700, because they never got it, because it's pretty hard. So that all brings us to Snorlax, or Relaxo. Snorlax is a very large Pokemon, and thus we can't fit the entirety of Snorlax into the frame. The world record score is 4060, which features an 830 size, 1200 pose, his best pose during a jolly dance he does during a specific one of the 3 Pokeflute signs, and this is all doubled to 4060. This is a fairly hard score, and only 8 people have ever done it, or at least have submitted it to Cyberscore, the rankings website for Pokémon Snap high scores. Top Pokesnap scorer Matador writes in his comment, "LMAO, I don't understand," showing how 4060 feels kind of random, with most people eking out a 4040 or 4020 instead. So that's why it's incredibly unusual that the German Pokémon Snap guidebook shows their Snorlax or Relaxo score as being 4400. This would imply a perfect 1000 size, with the 1200 Jolly Dance pose doubled to 4400. Now, as far as we know, and as far as anyone has ever seen, a 1000 size is impossible. Even with other dances and other poses, including this one where you just pesterball Snorlax and he scratches his belly, any size over the typical 700 to 800 points is not really feasible. We've just never seen it. So this raises a very interesting question. What do these German developers and guide writers know that we still haven't uncovered today? Based on the entire body of scores published in this guide, it would be surprising that they're all possible except for this one. Why go through the effort of actually playing and figuring out that you can't quite get a max score on Charizard or Gyarados, but then just faking it on Snorlax? Is there some secret knowledge that only a select few deep in some mysterious facility in Berlin knew last century? Or is the Snorlax 4400 all a crock of nonsense? One final possibility comes from taking a look at the English guide and this Japanese webpage still up on the Nintendo official website today, and noticing that their Snorlax high scores are listed at 4040. Now, this is known to be possible, and is a tough but reasonable score, as are most of these. Could the German translators simply have mistyped 4040 as 4400? And maybe when double checking, they looked at it at a glance, figured, 1,000 size plus 1,200 pose, double to 4,400. It made sense when giving it one final look over. It's a theory, the typo theory, and maybe it's the most likely one, but things get even more strange when we look at the only one other Pokemon listed with a higher score than the known world record today, Butterfree. The German Spielerberater, or Player's Guide, sorry, I just love saying that word, well, it lists Butterfree's high score at 4960. The English Player's Guide also lists Butterfree's high score at 4960. The Japanese website on nintendo.co.jp lists Butterfree's high score at 4960. The known world record today for Butterfree, with picture proof, listed on Cyberscore, corroborated by the Pokémon Snap community after 25 years of attempting high scores in the game, by the game's champion and Pokesnap legend Feketerago, is 4890. 4890 is actually really good too. Second place is 4830 by Tsukige. So 4960 would be truly insane. But what might be equally insane is that based on what we know about Butterfree in Pokemon Snap, 4960 should at least be technically possible. You see, Butterfree flies around the course and often stops just above this bridge partway through the beach stage. There are other Butterfrees flying around, and so ideally you could get a main subject 1000 size Butterfree when he stops in front of the bridge. You could get the nice 1000 pose, Butterfree's best possible, all double to 4000, and then you could, in theory, get a 1000 size second Butterfree for a max possible score of 5000 total. This is the theory, at least. You could also get a background third Butterfree for some more points, maybe, but these are usually only seen on lower scoring Butterfrees in the mid 4000 points, since you're kind of giving up some of that space that the first and second Butterfree could be filling up in order to see the faraway third Butterfree. Feketerago's 4890 score features a 970 main subject Butterfree and 950 second Butterfree. Tsukige's 4830 score features a 990 main subject Butterfree, but only an 850 second Butterfree. In order to get the Nintendo claimed score of 4960, one would need, say, a 1000 main subject Butterfree and 960 second Butterfree, or 990 main and 980 second, or maybe some way to better incorporate the third Butterfree. Whatever the case may be, it's a lot closer to something known to be possible than the Snorlax claim. And given that all three strategy guides, English, German, and Japanese, corroborate the score, it really makes you ponder. Butterfree's movement is somewhat complicated, with a known setup to get the two Butterfrees well framed, requiring very specific movements and button inputs from power on. So Butterfree has been studied and investigated at a pretty deep level in order to get the scores that we have achieved over the years. But we're still a ways off from 4960. Yet all of the Nintendo devs seem to corroborate the claimed score of 4960. Again, not all the Pokemon have the same scores across the three tables. Like, Porygon has a claimed 5610 on English, 5560 on German, and the record is 5800. That's the trend that you'd kind of expect to see. Years of community grinding leading to slightly higher scores where possible, or maxed scores where those are the case. So what happened with Snorlax and Butterfree? Did the Nintendo devs know something that we've been unable to uncover all these years later? Might they have been playing an earlier version of the game with slight differences that led to these unmatchable scores? I'm not sure about that one, but it is an idea. Now, one last thing to check, obviously, are the pages in the guidebooks specifically about the beach level, where we can find details and techniques for Snorlax and Butterfree. Surely there can't be any secret knowledge hidden in this obvious of plain sight. And if we take a look, there isn't. It's kind of odd, actually. The photos that they include for Snorlax and Butterfree show much lower scores than what are mentioned on the high score table at the end of the booklet. Now, this was also true with Pikachu, and we know that their Pikachu score did eventually become possible, but once again, this simply raises more questions than answers. I personally think the most likely explanations are that Snorlax 4400 is a typo exclusive to the German Player's Guide, but that some Nintendo dev somewhere went absolutely bananas on Butterfree and got a score that is completely possible, but no one has been able to match it in the years since. And that's a heck of a story if true. It's the one I want to believe, and given all we know about this game, it certainly could be true. Thanks for watching, my friends. Stay true, and I'll see you in the next stream or video.